So are you gonna announce the Oya zooming?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So zooming.
Yeah.
Make your announcement.
Okay. So
How do I get out of
this
here?
Ouya, we requested it. Well, we requested funding for it from the CS department, and the CS department agreed to fund it. So basically, it's now for the club to use. Every Ouya console is supposed to be a dev console, so you can just hook it up to your computer and use Java to develop for it. Is there any other language you can use? I'm not going to see. Anyways, we just set this up today, and we'll figure things out as it goes. If you want to use it, the policy is that you can't take it out of the room, and there needs to be an officer present. When you're using the Ouya, we'll hold on to your check card, and you can come back and choose your check card for the Ouya, and that's that. That's the policy. Well, the story is that the CS department has had stuff stolen before, so they want us to have an equipment policy. So that's what we came up with.
Seems fair.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's
How do you make stuff for the Oya?
How do you make stuff for the Ouya?
Tell us, zooming.
Well,
Harvey's like acting like he knows.
I know there's a really good framework.
Is
for
it with
but
Java?
I haven't tried it out. Yeah, with Java.
Yeah.
It's based, so
And that's with Java.
yeah.
Cool.
I'll try it out.
If I wanted to make something for this, what would I do? Like email you or whatever? If any regular member wants to make something, and
Maybe
they want to play with the Oya or whatever.
Well, I don't know how to make stuff for it yet, so you probably shouldn't email me.
So if somebody if somebody wants to use the Oya, though, what's the process? What do they do?
You figure out how to use it. Like,
No, I mean like it's gonna be locked away, right? And you can an officer needs to give you permission.
I don't think it needs to be locked away as long as
Not?
you keep the IEEE rule of locking the room.
to
only after
develop for
everybody else
Ouya,
leaves.
you don't even need to have an Ouya.
That makes it really
Good.
easy.
Yeah.
Cool.
Like
Awesome.
everyone in this room could develop for the Ouya, not even come in here and use the Ouya, and have a game to put on the Ouya to play.
So you basically use the Ouya for like direct testing.
Yeah, real testing.
Yeah.
Testing with the bad controller buttons.
And the
small
straps.
memory and all the stuff.
Interested
That it comes
though, there's a framework
libg.
called libgdx that you should.
Is that an X?
That's confusing. That looks kind of like a lib or like C.
Backwards C.
Use a different color.
Why would you read a B as a backwards C?
Use a different color because the black is running out.
Okay.
Because the X is written as two C's. That's why I read that.
It is too.
Yeah. It's confusing.
Draw a real X. No.
Why do you write your X like that? Write one line and then cross it. There you go.
Yay. Okay.
Whatever. But yeah, this is a really good framework, and they have tutorials online. And it's open source and community managed, so you can use it to develop for basically like.
But you're
It's
also
Java based, and you can use it to develop for like Android mobile stuff, HTML5, PC, a bunch of stuff. So very worth looking into, and it's compatible with Ouya.
Okay.
And if you have a question about this, I can answer some of it because I've tried it.
Okay. So now we're gonna start the meeting again. The first. So we wanted to start the meeting by talking about game projects that are currently going on. So how many of you are actually working on a game project right now? Oh, cool. Maybe. Well, you're
Jonathan?
Yeah, where is he?
Yeah, where the heck is
So, do we want to go around and talk about what you're working on? Anyone want to volunteer first? Yeah.
I'm Jordan again. I'm working. I'm using Construct. I got it off of Steam, and I wanted to work on a platformer in which you use a grapple to bring platforms closer or away from you. That way you can platform kind of like in reverse. You can like move things away from you, bring things closer to you, and that's pretty much all I got.
Sounds cool. Are you working by yourself or with anyone?
It's me and Alex.
Yeah.
We're a couple. That's the thing.
Anyone else?
We haven't even started yet, so.
What's your project?
We don't know yet. I was like, Jonathan, what are you gonna make, buddy? And he was like, something that goes in my portfolio. And I was like,
Well, you took the first step. You got a team. Anyone else?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm working on a game in Unity 3D. Which version? I forget which version. The new one, but
I think it's
4.0.
Yes.
Yeah.
4.0 or 4.1 or something.
Something like that. And so right now I'm just making a sort of generic, like skill-based RPG with like different combat mechanics.
Cool. How long have you been working on it?
Depends on how you count time.
How much time have you put into it?
How much time I put into it? Yeah, maybe like
How many
80
seconds?
hours total.
Cool. Is that the project that you started last semester? Or towards the end of last
It's like
semester?
at the end of summer I started.
Okay. Cool. Anyone else? No volunteers? I saw more hands on this side.
Yeah.
Patrick?
Kinda have one going on, but
You don't want to
What
talk
is it?
about it.
uh,
is it child friendly?
let's see. I'm kind of working on something at the moment, and I say kind of because I'm not sure when I'm gonna be continuing working on this, but like,
Right.
see, I've made like a prototype for like a kind of like a Galaga style shoot 'em up with the
Yeah, you showed us that,
with like
didn't you?
the like computerized Tron art style.
Dude,
So
that's sick.
let me see. I actually have it on my laptop right now, but I don't want to pull it over because I'm
It'll be time
using
consuming.
it to record Livio's audio right now. So
Okay.
Are you using XNA?
yeah, it's being made in XNA. So
Awesome.
which eventually I would like to have it running with like a controller and stuff like that. So
No more volunteers? Yep.
So far I've only worked on this website called Roblox. So
Right.
I'm working on a bunch of projects there, but like I have some side projects, and one of my projects that I really want to finish, but I haven't worked on in a couple months, and I started last November, is an empire building game where you get to pick, like, it's multiplayer automatically because of Roblox, and you get to set up a server, and then you and your friends can be in that server, and then it's like within the same game, but you get to build up your tycoon empire type thing with point and click, and you gain tax revenue, and then you can go and attack the other people on your world, and it's basically a mix of SimCity 4 and Risk.
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how to code, so pretty lame right there, but I've been using the RPG Maker engine,
Ooh.
and I made a couple RPGs, a couple of which at the beginning were failures. They're fun to play until they crash. And like it's got the same, like, you know, the noobish barren landscape type thing going on where you have to walk for 5 minutes until you actually get to But I made one decent RPG with that, and I tried to break the mold of normal RPG Maker RPGs by giving your character powers that you can use on the map to finish puzzles, kind of like Zelda, but without the items really. And you've got like a energy bar that you can drain in order to use those powers. And right now, so I finished that, and right now I'm working on a cooking game using RPG Maker for a friend because they requested it. And I was like, hey, why not? It'll be fun. So I'm trying to use the engine to make a menu right now, and then I'm going to try to make combinations that you can use in the game. And I set up a town, and I've got a friend that works with me. He made a lot of custom graphics for the previous RPG, and we're planning out a game right now.
Sounds like fun. Is that everyone? Well, are you working on something other than our project?
Oh yeah. Well, I'm gonna talk about.
Okay.
So the prototype that I basically had a diary in my book, but I really want to find some time to hammer into an actual prototype. Is a game where you're like a blind swordsman and you can hear the enemies approaching you and you use the sound to determine how you want to defend yourself and to attack the enemies. So basically, you'll probably definitely require headphones because I'm going to try to use the left and right channels and going to try to do some sound layering to see.
Can you use like binaural? Are you gonna have like binaural sound in there?
What's that?
So the idea is that you have you basically replicate a hit while you're recording it. So you have two microphones, one for each ear, and it sort of simulates the ears around it. So like you might have silicon ears, and if you're listening to it on headphones, you can actually hear directional, sort of.
If it goes beyond the prototype, yes.
Okay.
That sounds pretty cool. Yeah, I'm trying to see if like just having very little graphics and having it being mostly sound would require you to like get into a zone while playing it. It should be interesting to see if that happens. It'll be really cool if it happens.
Cool. Didn't you make another prototype earlier this semester?
Yeah.
How did that go?
I sent it.
Okay. Well, so earlier this semester, Zooming and I were working on a game project. What we really wanted to do was make it like a really serious project where we tried to ship a product at the end and ship it to market and maybe make money. And hopefully the idea was to use the idea of making money as a way of measuring how good of a game we made. And then, so we started working on it and we realized that we did not have time this semester for a project. Hello. And so we ended up canceling the project. Like, how long ago did we cancel it? A week? 4 days? Was it 4 days? Felt longer. Maybe. But yeah, it was so sad. I wanted to work on a game and we just didn't have time. So at least we didn't keep working on it and stress over something that we just couldn't do. But I still have a prototype that I want to finish. My prototype was basically, I had two ideas for racing game prototypes. One was a game where the control scheme is it's a touch screen based control scheme. So you click on a point and your car like grapples to that point and you like turn around that grapple point or something, and that's a whole control scheme. And the other variant of that idea was your car is just infinitely always drifting, and what you can control is how tight your drift is, or like basically you're always turning, and so you kind of have like this spiral control scheme where if you can loosen your spiral, you tighten it, and you're basically doing all weird stuff. Now, I want to see how fun that kind of game is, and that's why I really want to finish those prototypes, but I do not have time. So I think that's all of our game projects so far. Is there anyone who really wants to start a project but just doesn't know how to or something? Yeah. Anyone want to?
I don't have anything yet.
Well, I imagine some people will want to join a project as opposed to like starting one on their own, so that they don't have to work alone.
Talk about the idea.
What is your proposal?
Do you have an idea?
I have a lot of ideas. Like, I wanted to make a sort of RPG maker, but I like storylines, like dark ones, like Corpse Party. That one, I like that one. I like making little horror.
Cool.
That one.
If you want to use RPG Maker, you could talk to him.
I just want to use anything
What's your name again?
Austin.
Austin?
Austin.
What?
Austin.
Lawson.
A lot of people call me Austin.
Lawson.
That's
Okay.
like my second name now.
And your name's Tene? Awesome. Yeah?
Hello.
What's your name?
My name's George. I've never been here before.
Cool.
What
What are you doing way back there?
well, I was late.
Well, we have room here.
Ooh, yeah, should I go ahead?
Yeah. Ninja jump.
Join the party.
But anyway, my question to you all is, because I noticed there's a lot of really technically adept people here,
Yeah.
and most of the games you guys have been describing deals with just the interactive experience of the video game, but I'm a literature major.
Ooh.
And I wonder if anybody here is like really interested in making like a game that is also really heavily tied to good storytelling. But see, that's the thing. Like I was reading some biographies of famous game writers. I don't remember most of their names, but the guy who wrote the storyline for BioShock, you know, or the chick who wrote.
Avin?
Wait, no.
I thought it was Ken.
But anyway,
Ken Levine?
Oh, I thought it was Adam Levine.
What?
What's
not
Adam.
Kevin Levine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Kevin Levine.
Anyway.
There's this big argument with writers and game developers that like, the writing side of it is really overshadowed by the technical side.
Yeah, it's.
But, you know, do you guys value storytelling?
So,
Everybody
it's-
here, dude.
it's-
Like,
Well, there's a specific process for making a good game with a good story.
Like if you look at Walking Dead or with Lee, that one storyline coupled with the graphics was
Usually when it comes to game stories, what you have to do is first define the game itself, and then figure out what story can you tell with that game.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna, like games like Heavy Rain, where they define the game to be very minimal just so that the story could have more room. That's one example. But then if you play something more abstract, like
Dear Esther.
yeah, Dear Esther, or actually the Bit Trip games, if you ever heard of them, they kind of have their continuous story in a way, but they're kind of weird. Yeah.
The only disadvantage is that a lot of us don't have the technical expertise or the financial backing in order to do the super
Right.
dream games that we love to do with like awesome characters and super cool scenes and emotional themes and stuff.
I'd like
not at this current point.
I'd also like to add that we don't really have that much producing capability, like the person who does the scheduling and putting together like all of the
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why you need a plan.
Producing, because you have the director, the producer, I guess the writer, and then the person who does the programming, and all these things. And with that, when you have a certain amount of people, you need a producer or else they'll fall apart.
Yep.
And it's a really hard job. And usually the director, I guess, also the literary person has to be very organized with these things.
But there's also like a sense of you need. That's basically why you need to figure out what the game is and then figure out what kind of story can this game tell. Because when you're working in a small team like in here, you're gonna be basically making this really crude thing, and you can't rely on cutscenes, or you can maybe rely on a lot of text, but then you have to make sure that the game design fits a lot of text. But yeah, it's really interesting though. Like it's a fun design problem.
Skills, we're gonna come find them.
Yep.
Yeah. Have you read Tom Russell's any piece written by him about writings in game development? He's
Tom Russell.
He wrote the book called Level Up. Anyways, he's a writer and he's a writer by trade, and he went into game development and he wrote partly for Gears of War. And there's a very interesting argument he mentioned. He said that actually a lot of people who are in games are very into trying to make a good storyline, making emotional storyplay. It's not like they just want to make some exciting shooting. They want it to be like emotional also.
They want it to be meaningful.
Right, they want it to be meaningful.
What's the name of the author?
Tom Russell.
I made a note of it.
I said, are you sure?
Maybe not.
Can't find anything.
If you look up Level Up,
Yeah, I got the title. Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
And he said that when he was like younger, when he looked at the video games, he also thought that the writers could do a better job. But after he went into the industry, like into the AAA industry, he says he's less sure whether writing and games can actually fit together as a whole, just like as well as you imagine it, without actually doing it. If that makes sense.
Yep.
So like the inherent difficulty of adding writing to games, I think it's probably much more difficult than just putting the two together. There's a lot of subtleties involved that makes it very difficult also.
Is the ultimate goal of game developers to kind of have the game write itself almost through the interactive relationship?
Also, like you make a game that tells a story every time you, a different story every time you play,
Yeah. That could be it.
like a story generator.
Yeah, I mean, there's games like that out there, but there's also games that try to be like literature, that has a central theme and just tries to express that thing. And both types are very good, but one of the reasons we don't see many of them is probably because it's also very difficult.
Okay, so we should move on now. Now that I've erased the board.
Zooming, was it Level Up? The Guide to Great Video Game Design. His name is Scott Rogers. If it's not, then it's two Asian people.
Let me look it up. No,
That's not it?
Oh, no,
What?
it's called Extra Lives, that's why.
Oh, I
It's the
think
same thing.
I think I found. Is Extra Lives the name of a blog?
Extra Lives, why video games? Tom Bezos. Yeah.
Okay.
You should email. You should post it on the Facebook group.
Yeah, I'll post an article. He wrote a specific article. About
Okay.
It's probably one of the most interesting pieces.
Okay.
So now it's time for my talk.
Yay!
I'm gonna talk about. I hope this is good enough. Career advice. Is this like a mix between black and purple? Purple, black.
You should just use red.
Maybe it only looks slightly black.
I have a lime green marker if you want.
In my one,
Oh.
green. I mean, like, what?
Oh no.
Oh,
Or
it's
you're
Definitely
green with
mixing
it.
the colors.
career.
Now it looks like it's trying to say something about career that's all dark and scary. But yeah, career advice. So most of the people in here want to work in the games industry someday, right? Right.
Yep.
So yeah. So my talk is split up into two halves. The first half is just general career advice, because you need it if you want to work in the game industry. And the second half is more game industry specific advice. The general advice that I have, it's mainly because I've seen a lot of people give advice before, and eventually, like one mistake that I made when figuring out how career advice works and why they advise certain things as opposed to other things. Eventually, I started to build like this really artificial model of how jobs work and stuff in my head, and it wasn't grounded in reality or anything at all. It was just, it's kind of like how they when you learn something, but from without the experience, you get this idea of what it's like, and then when you actually go get that experience, you're like, oh, that's not what it was.
Like college.
Yeah.
In high school, they tell you.
Yep.
All the time, they ground it into your head. They're like, do your homework.
And if you don't do your homework,
You'll
then
die.
teachers won't accept it. They'll throw it in the trash.
Exactly. And then
Yeah.
when you like come to college, you're like, all right, I've heard all these rumors about college. Just get out there. Well, this is totally different than what I thought.
Okay. So I'm gonna start with basically like a story. I have many tiny stories in my talk. So I worked at Microsoft this summer. I worked as an intern, and when I was getting my internship, when I was interviewing for that, they flew me out to Seattle, and they flew out hundreds of people to Seattle. Like you go there, and it's like this entire process where they just ship people into the city, interview them, ship them back out. And it just feels crazy. But I met a lot of other candidates at the time, and specifically I met them after their interviews were over, and most of them were very upset with the fact that they did not get an offer. And some of the comments that I kept hearing from them were like, oh, it's so unfair, oh, they didn't tell me what I did wrong, or oh, I got every question right, but I still didn't get a job, what was wrong with this? And the thing, I don't really know why they didn't get hired, but the thing that I want to say is that this is basically the real world. It's not like school where you're being graded, and if you get the right answer, then you'll get your diploma or whatever. It's when people are hiring you, they have a bunch of other criteria other than do you have the skills for this job? They're basically trying to decide, are you somebody that I want to work with? Like, that's the fundamental question that they're asking. Like, of course, skill is a big part of that, but it's also, how cool are you? And do you work well with others? Do you have things that we want? Like, do you have values or skills or traits? So I'm gonna ask a general question. Have you ever met anyone or wished you met somebody that made you go, man, I really want to work with that person on a project? That would be pretty awesome.
Yes.
Yay.
Nice.
So if you could think of like what's the ideal person that you would want to work with, what kind of traits would they have?
Charismatic.
Charisma?
Good communication.
Someone who makes me want to be better.
Someone who knows
Interesting.
what they're doing, unlike me.
Oh, that's
Or
cool.
if they don't know what they're doing, at least they try. They don't give up.
If you can read my horrible handwriting.
Yes,
Nice.
that too. Someone who's not pessimistic.
Nice.
Nice.
Optimistic. Strong what? Strong sense of responsibility. So you can trust them. Reliable. Gets things done.
Yes.
Don't you hate it when you work with somebody who just can't get things done?
All the time.
So yeah.
High school group project.
Yeah.
Actually, somebody who has a good sense of humor, especially
Oh,
when
that's
it
good.
hits the fan, you know.
Humor.
Freaking out, they laugh. That's the kind of person I want to work
They can stay calm in the face of disaster.
with. You'll get there, man. It'll happen.
Like I know I love to work with people who are just fun in general, fun to be with. Like they make the project more fun. Like that's why I'm doing the project in the first place, to have fun. Now the question is, do you have these traits?
Yes.
Or some of them at least.
All of
Should we add humble up there?
Humility.
Like I have more humble than the rest of you guys.
Humility?
Yep. It looks like an X, maybe, or a T.
Why humility?
That's the perfect, like, shady government contracting company or whatever.
The ultimate bad guys.
So, but yeah, these are great examples of things that people look for when they're hiring. And it's not like they have a list of things that they're looking for. It's more like they're asking, do I want to work with this person? And these are things that contribute to the answer that they come up with when they meet you and when they interview you. I know so different companies have different values. Some will value skill above other things like these, soft skills like these. I know some will probably, also others will, like if you're in a small studio, they will probably prioritize how well you work with the team, just because the state of the team is such a big impact on your game project that if you're hiring for a small studio and one person is going to be like a whole fifth of your team or something, then you will definitely want to prioritize these kinds of soft skills for that. I know that another thing that a lot of people like to look for when hiring is they like to look for people that are different, like not different for the sake of being different, but more for the sake of not having everybody in the company be the same. Like, have you ever seen a company where everyone's just basically has the same personality, or like a whole team of those kinds of people? You do not want to work with them. A team of nuns? That sounds adventurous, actually. Well, it's also like, this happens more so in the tech industry in general, where you end up with companies where their diversity is just terrible, and nobody likes to work in a non-diverse thing, because that's just boring, really. Like, one of the cool things about that I realized while working at Microsoft was like, wow, there are so many different kinds of people here. Some of them don't even know English all that well. But apparently they bring so much value to the team, and just the diversity, the cumulative diversity in the company, it brings out a lot of different ways of thinking, a lot of ideas, and a lot of creativity as well. But yeah. Wow, I went through a lot of content. Scrolling up. Okay, so we mentioned a lot of like team-based skills. If you don't feel like you have these things or any other team-based skills, the only way to really acquire these skills is through experience, basically working on a lot of team projects. But also asking for feedback from your teammates on how good of a teammate you are. That will really make a difference in a way. And you have to be serious about getting feedback. You have to kind of pull the feedback out of people because they'll want to be nice to you. Like, oh, I'm a good teammate. I'm not going to say something mean about you. But if you're asking for feedback, you want to encourage them to say those hidden thoughts that they just got really frustrated about you with.
Tear me down.
Hold a roast for yourself.
Yeah, and if your team is cool enough, you might want to go around the table and have people vent.
So what don't you like about Livio? What do you really hate?
Yeah, that's actually really healthy thing to do if the people in the team can handle it at least.
Like a team building exercise.
Yeah.
Name the one thing you hate most about the person across.
So.
Great way to make people feel terrible.
Yep.
Team destruction.
But you also so
Just like nothing.
so that was the challenge. There's a challenge sometimes when it comes to getting negative feedback, but you also need to value the positive feedback as well. It's very easy to focus only on the negative, but the positive feedback will basically tell you what not to change about yourself and tell you or how to make it that better. Like if somebody says like, oh, you're pretty fun sometimes, but then when things get bad, you turn into a jerk. You could just think about more consciously and say, I'm gonna try to not be a jerk next time when things go bad. Yeah. And also positive feedback is good to remember just because it gives you more confidence. You don't want to feel like a loser. So yeah, so that's not to say that hard skills aren't important because they do make a big difference. But there's a certain mentality that you need to think about when it comes to your hard skills. I know there's a blogger that I follow called Cal Newport. He writes a lot about productivity and career advice and all this cool stuff. He's actually a computer science graduate student or maybe a professor now at MIT. Yeah, he's really cool. So I recently got his book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. I think that's, yeah, isn't it good?
Yeah, I heard the audiobook though, I didn't read it.
I have the audiobook.
I feel so bad now.
I listen to audiobooks more often than I read books.
It's just audiobooks are frowned upon in the literature department. Just keep it hush hush, man.
What if I want to play Minecraft while listening?
Audiobooks are the best, aren't they? You know,
Yeah.
multitask. You do whatever you want while you're driving or whatever.
I always play games while listening. So this phrase that he likes to quote a lot. He did not coin the phrase to be so good that they can't ignore you. He got it from somebody else who I do not remember at all. But the idea is when you're trying to get into a job or into a job market, you need to approach it from the very serious perspective of I may or may not have the skills that I need for this, but I'm gonna work my way there, and I'm gonna try to be so good that they can't ignore me, basically.
Career capital, right? He
Yeah.
says increment your career capital. He gets kind of technical, but
Yeah.
it's good though. It makes a lot of sense.
He's just a technical guy. But that piece of advice sounds like he wants you to be super hardcore though. Like, oh, I'm gonna give up my life and be the best computer scientist or the best artist ever. And that sounds too extreme. It sounds imbalanced. But just trying to get there, just actively improving your skills, that will already set you apart from the rest. And you don't want to be somebody who basically graduates from college and expects people to give them a job without really having the skills and being really ignorant of what skills you need either. A lot of times if you don't have the skills, companies will really appreciate the fact that you know that you don't have them and that you know you are working for them. I know that, so my manager at Microsoft, he said that was like one of the his favorite things about me, that I was consciously aware of what I didn't know, and that I was always thinking about how I can find out the things that I don't know. Yeah, it's, when you're working on a team with somebody and that person has that quality, it makes them a much less of a hassle to manage. And you're like, oh, I want that person on my team. That it means I have less work to do once I bring them on board. There's also when I was at Microsoft, I actually met an intern who was the most stereotypical computer science nerd I've ever met, and he.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It was not a good thing. It was he did not have any social skills, or at least like he sort of did, but he would actively tell people that he did not have any social skills, in order, as if to please forgive me. I don't have any social skills. But he turned out to be pretty cool after I actually got to know him. It was just bad first impressions. But when I first met him, I'm like, how did this guy get hired? Why would anyone want this guy to work for them? And as I met him, I realized this guy is super smart. He's like the most knowledgeable person I've met when it comes to technical things. And that's exactly an example of, he was so good that they couldn't ignore him, even if he was kind of awkward. So what I was saying earlier about people who graduate from college without knowing what skills are expected of them, and without knowing that they don't even have the skills. I have a funny story of this guy called Ryan Creighton. He's a blogger that I follow. He's a Canadian game designer. And he wrote an article some time ago about how he got into the games industry. And basically what he did was he graduated from like this really sketchy animation school, and with a degree that nobody would really cared about. And then he went to the Games Developers Conference, and in the article he said it like, is this where they hand out all the jobs? And what he was trying to say was, he was so naive back then that he literally expected to go there and be handed a job, and with people just fighting to get him, even though he did not have any skills to speak for at all. And that actually happens all the time in the games industry. There are a lot of people who don't know how to get into the industry. They don't know what to do, and so they just go ahead, go to some conference, or just start applying, and they don't know why they're not getting offers. And they're also getting rejected too. Like, I've read a few stories on the web about how people would. I met at least one. I read at least one like angry rant of this game design student who wanted to be the best game designer ever, and he was so frustrated that no one would expect him. And then I think it was Ryan Creighton who left a comment on that article, telling him to wake up. Like, you do not know how to design anything, and please go out and learn for yourself these skills. Yeah. But yeah, it's more. This kind of advice is more important for us specifically, because this school does not have any game-specific related curriculum other than that one game design class, and maybe that other one that might come back. Maybe. Yeah, it sounds pretty daunting though to say, oh, we have to go out of our way and learn everything on our own. But we're not really on our own. We got this crazy awesome club here, and we're giving talks about stuff too. But it's still, you should still please be knowledgeable of what positions you want to get into, what skills those positions require, how close or how far you are to actually having those skills, and then working your way there. And please don't become super hardcore either. That's just not healthy. So hiring is basically a two-way process though. It's like, we focus a lot on how to get people to hire you, how to become attractive to companies. But you also have to remember to think about when you're applying for a company, you have to keep asking yourself, do I want to work here? Do they have the values that I have, that I agree with? Or do they have enough diversity if you care about that a lot? Is the team that you're going to be working with cool enough? Or if you like working with them, or if you want to work with them? and how much do they pay? But it's very important to think about that though, because a lot of times, especially in the games industry specifically, people, when they get their first job, they will be they will feel like if that they fought so hard for that job that they'll never get any other job, and then they stick around even though maybe the company is not very good or the team that they are working with stinks and they're just having a terrible experience, or maybe they're just being asked to put in a lot of hours without compensation. That in that case you definitely should quit. But definitely stay, what's the word? Make sure you stay alert about what you need and what you want as well.
The word you're looking for is vigilant.
Yeah, I guess. Don't torture yourself, basically. Yep.
You probably shouldn't quit in that situation because it's actually easier to find a job to still have a job.
That's true.
So just probably keep
Quit.
that position until you have a new one guaranteed.
That's a good idea. And you quit if it's hurting your health and if it's an emergency. Otherwise, take the more secure path and find a better job secretly. Another bit of advice is to keep your opportunities open. First of all, like in the games industry, there are a lot of, I guess in the tech industry in general, I guess, people like to talk bad about certain companies or certain people or certain games. And in the games industry is a lot smaller than you think. If you talk bad about a studio and then next thing you know you start applying to that studio, they might have heard from a friend or something that you hate them.
Stay civil.
So you're basically burning bridges. Yeah. Yep. And it's also if you do a bad job at your previous job, like maybe you were just being a jerk to everybody, that will probably go around too. If they have like a friend or something.
So don't bash EA Sports.
Yep.
Football.
So another thing about keeping your opportunities open is to remember that the games industry is not all there is. There's a lot of surrounding industries that are really interesting, like the general larger software industry the games industry is basically a subset of the larger software industry. There's a lot to learn about how to build a piece of software from start to finish, and a lot of those skills apply to the games industry. And that's why you shouldn't basically decline offers from really awesome jobs just because they're not working in games. Like I almost declined my offer for Microsoft for a full-time position, but then I realized this is a pretty awesome job and I know already that I like it. Why would I decline it? just to be picky. There's also the toys industry is very similar to the games industry in a way, especially if you're a game designer. There's a lot of overlap between game design and toy design. Like there was this guy who wrote a book. What was his name? David Robertson. He wrote a book called Brick by Brick. It was basically it was like a case study on the Lego company, and he outlined basically the history of the company and all these lessons they learned about the creative process and how to make a toy that kids will like and stuff. And a lot of the lessons that Lego learned were a lot of exactly the same lessons that game designers have been learning in recent years. It like the idea of how to be creative with how to prototype well, how constraints will actually make you more creative. It's just crazy. all this overlap. The toys industry is a little kind of weird because they're so gender segregated. Like you're either making a toy for boys or for girls, and the way it's marketed is kind of weird. But it still sounds like a lot of fun. But yeah, it's good to explore other industries in general because it gives you such an awesome perspective. If you only know about the games industry, you'll kind of be closed in a box. There's a lot of creativity that can come from just being aware of how other industries work. Yeah, just pursue anything you're interested in, really. Don't become too hardcore. So now in the second half, game industry stuff. So the first bit of advice, like the main one that I have, is to just get to know the industry, really. And now you're probably wondering, how do I get to know the game industry? There's a lot of so many things that you can do. First, you can read industry news. Like there's a lot of news sites out there that are catered towards game developers as opposed to game consumers. Like IGN, GameSpot, those are all for consumers, people who want to buy games, people who want to see how good a game is compared to others. But the game developer websites, they're more interesting in my opinion because they're
Sutra is definitely one.
yeah, Gamma Sutra, they're so awesome. Gamma Sutra. Look how neat my handwriting is when I try. So, Gamma Sutra is like probably the biggest game developer news site. There are a few other examples. Anyone know of any?
Kotaku?
Yeah, Kotaku's a good one. There's kind of a big overlap between game industry news and game consumer news, depending on if you only look at their Kotaku.
Slashdot.
I don't know about
Slashdot?
It's ridiculous.
General tech news. Sure.
Yeah.
Is it slash dot? I don't know. Fine, I'll write it out. Slash dot. I wrote a dot and then a slash, which didn't make any sense. That's a D.
Yeah, that looks like a O.
Now it's got a backwards O on top of it. Another good source is Polygon. They're so awesome. They have they're so crazy. Polygon. I also like to read the Penny Arcade Report, which is like Penny. Is it hyphen arcade?
Yeah. And
.com/report. They basically pick awesome stories around the web, and they also post some stories as well.
Penny Arcade also has the extra credits.
Yeah, they do. They have extra credits, which are also a great resource because extra credits is designed. It's a weekly web show, and it's designed to bridge the gap between developers and consumers in terms of discussing things. Like they talk a lot about industry issues and they try to translate it into something a general consumer could understand. And they're actually very articulate and very intelligent people, and they're just so awesome. I'll write them down somewhere. Extra credits. I post a lot of their episodes on the Facebook group. If you don't watch them every week already, you should.
I caught up.
Good for you. But yeah, following news sites is a great way to learn about the industry. You'll start basically, something that I noticed that when I started following news sites was that I really lost interest in consumer news. I just didn't care about the next big game that was coming up, because I didn't have any plans to buy it. And I guess I felt more. I started to get cheap. I didn't want to spend my money, so I didn't want to look at basically what was in advertisement for our next product. At least these sites, they tend to post more interesting articles and opinion pieces that deal with deeper topics. Another great thing, other than following your news sites, is also just to follow your favorite studios. If you have some games that you really love, figure out who made them and start following them either on Twitter or Facebook or their blog if they have one. A lot of them will actually post cool stuff or links to cool stuff. For instance, I follow some of my favorite studios are Codemasters and Criterion Games. They make racing games. I also actually really follow the Gaijin Games, which is a small indie studio.
That's a Bitrunner?
Yep. BitTrip. Team Meat, they're fun to follow. They made Super Meat Boy. Double Fine, they made Psychonauts and Super Giant Games, yeah. They made Bastion, didn't they? Yep.
I follow Insomniac.
Yeah. And when you start following these companies, you'll eventually start following the people inside these companies. And I think following people is the best, if not, probably definitely the best way to learn about the industry. Because they will post really interesting things that they find interesting, not things that their company posted, but more like if you follow them on Twitter, they'll link to things, they'll retweet things, and you'll eventually start building like this big network of people that you follow, and you'll become very knowledgeable of them. And then when you meet them at GDC or whatever, you can say hi to them, and you'll have something to talk about. Like, hey, I've been following you for years. I have your name tattooed onto my back. But yeah, it's also very interesting to just who made these games to figure out like what are they like, what are they interested in, and why did they make these decisions? What are their values? It gives you, if you're a game designer, it's more interesting because it kind of gives you another avenue to critique or analyze their games. Or to see common threads in their games. So some of the people that I like to follow, there's Fiona Sperry. She's the director for Criterion Games. She actually she posted a couple of articles some time ago, but I don't think she's updated her thing recently. There's Genova Chen, the guy who made one of the co-founders of that game company. They made Journey, Flower, those things.
Yay.
Those things. There's also the other co-founder, which is Kelly Santiago. Man, I wanted to put like my favorite people who I follow, but I couldn't pick one of them, so I made like this ginormous list in my notes. There's Kim Swift, Brenda Romero, Tim Schafer, all of the people in extra credits.
Yay.
There's Jesse Schell, Eric Zimmerman. I don't know if any of you recognize these.
I do.
Yeah. So it's probably going to take too much time to even tell you who they are, but just find people and you'll learn new things. Another good thing that you can do to learn about the industry is to just talk to people who are already in the industry, like literally talking to them. Like send your favorite developers or your designers an email asking them, hey, do you have any advice for me on anything? But most people like to give advice. And especially if you can ask them to talk about themselves. People love to talk about themselves. Can you tell me how you broke into the industry? Or something like that. We also have a couple of indie studios here in Tucson that we are pretty friendly with. So there's Riverman Media. They are a 2-person company. One of them is Jacob Stevens. The other one's name I forget. Paul Stevens? I don't know. I did, but it was mainly with Jacob. I only saw the other guy once or twice. Anyway, I did intern with them. They don't usually do internships or anything, and they do not want to hire anybody. Because their belief is, oh, we are a small team and that's why we are successful. If we start hiring people, then our pay will basically get cut to pay for that third person. And that's their business model. And they seem pretty successful. They've been doing it for several years now. The other studio in Tucson is Kihon Games, or Kihon Games. I don't know how to pronounce them yet. What was the name of the guy who...
Taylor Paul?
No. Yeah, Taylor Paul was a student who did an internship with them. And he helped them ship a game and everything. It was so cool. What was the name of the guy who actually runs this or started the studio?
Mark Grossnickel.
Mark Grossnickel. I remember his funny last name. He actually came to give a talk at the club once. I think like 1 year ago. Not 2 years. Maybe it was 2 years. Nobody remembers. But that's just general networking too. Networking is a big part of getting a job in general. Like my manager at Microsoft, he actually described networking as being like breathing. You can't not network. Just meeting people and getting to know them is networking in general. The trick to it is keeping in touch with people. A lot of times you'll meet somebody like at a conference, you'll get their card, and then you never hear from them again. If you actually go through the process of staying in touch with that person, they will actually become
Livio,
like a friend or something.
Yeah, just before I run, quick advice I would give is have a portfolio. Doesn't matter what your area is. If you're a programmer, an artist, a designer, whatever, have a portfolio. If you don't, you won't get hired. So I'll probably give a talk later at some point. Because I've been to GDC a couple of times and I've talked with a bunch of developers in the industry. So, but yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so after talking about networking, I was going to move on to that. The last thing I had to say about networking, though, is that everyone in here is a great candidate for your network, because so many people trying to get into the industry, a good number of them are going to get in one way or another, and it's good to have people, to know people that are already inside, and once they get inside, they can basically help you get inside in a way. Like, they can vouch for you, they can give you a referral for their company, or they can, through their own network, after meeting other developers and working with them, they can meet other people and introduce you to other people. And yeah, socialize. So what he was saying about the portfolio, it's very important for you to actually show, like I spoke a lot earlier about gaining the skills that you need. It's important for you to actually show that you have those skills. You can't just tell them to take your word for it. You have to have a prior experience that proves that we did this, and the only way, and because we did this, you can see that I have these skills. And you can even tell them stories about things that happened to you while you were working on your projects, and the crazy situations you found yourself in, and the crazy things you had to do to get out of them. And if they see how passionate you are about while telling those stories, they'll definitely be interested. But it also show that you were actually involved in that project. It wasn't just something that you sat in and other people did most of the work. So when you're looking for the best way to figure out what kind of jobs, what kind of skills you need for whatever position you're aiming for, whether it's for programming, game design, art, music, whatever, the best way to see what skills you need is to actually look at job descriptions and see what skills they ask. A lot of people don't do that, and it's such an obvious thing to do. Especially for programming. Like, you can't just graduate with a CS degree and expect to get hired. You need to make sure you know the technologies that they want you to know how to use. And it also depends on what industry you're what part of the industry you're going to go into. Do you want to work in mobile games? You need to know how to use the technologies for those. If you want to work on HTML5 or on consoles or on PC, you need to stay on top of that. You can't just start applying one day and realize, oh wow, I need a job, but I don't have any of these skills. For game design, I could do a whole talk on how to become a good game designer. The first thing that you need to do is, if you're interested in game design, you need to make sure you know what game design is, because a lot of people think that game designers, that all they do is come up with ideas for games, and that's terrible. That sounds like a boring job too. So basically, there's an entire profession called design, if you haven't noticed yet. Like, there's graphic designers, web designers, fashion designers, architects, people who design things, product designers. Design is a skill set that can be applied to several industries, and what you're applying for is game design. And there are several skills inside of game design as well. The best way to learn about design is to just read books about design, get a foundation, and then from there work on projects and gain experience, because a big part of design is experience. And the only way to gain that experience is to basically do side projects, make a game, make 10 games. Like, remember Zooming's talk last week? Yeah, he started with that quote, make 10, like, the first 10 games you make will suck, so get them out of the way fast. And if you really want to be like so good that they can't ignore you, you can even go further. You can basically, you could start a blog about games. You could write about why certain game designs stink and why others are awesome. You could even start like a little notebook so that when you're playing a game, you could study them and think, what interesting things do they do here? And then you can turn those into articles. If you want to be that hardcore. But in terms of the game design jobs, there aren't many entry-level jobs. So most people end up working their way up through other positions. Like, I know a lot of people like to start in QA, which is quality assurance and testing, basically. Then they prove themselves and work their way up. Other people like to start in programming, especially if you know how to program. And yeah, there aren't many game internships either, game design internships, unless you're like a very big corporation and you have the room to spare. And the reason for it is when you're working on a game team, you mostly want the team to be as small as possible because that keeps you agile, and it keeps your game from taking 5 years to make, and it shrinks it down to like 2 years if you're making something big. Wow, I'm almost done. So the last thing that I have to say is say you're not applying for a game designer or a programmer, you still have to you don't necessarily have to, but it looks great on your resume to work on a game project. Like if you're an artist or a musician, or even if you're like a producer or anything. I guess producer is more important, that you have experience. But when you're working on a game project, you will learn how your work applies to games, basically. How will my work appear in the final product? And that's not very easy to learn from when you're not working on a game. There's a lot of constraints that happen when you're working on a game. And to be able to say, oh, I learned how to deal with these constraints, I became very good at dealing with these constraints. Please hire me, game studio. Then they'll probably believe you, especially if the work that you did was good. And that's mostly everything I had to say. So, are there any questions or comments? You all just want to leave now. It's 5 minutes over. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Go to those websites.